Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the closing lecture of the Sliver's lecture series titled Research Cultures. Tonight, we are very happy to welcome Yara Feghali. Yara is a French and Lebanese architectural designer working at the intersection of architecture education, transmedia, and immersive technologies. She is the creative director of Folly Feast Lab, co-founded with Viviane El Kmati. Her studio is based in Santa Monica and creates visually led immersive and interactive experiences to address the present social and urban themes using AI, game engines, and 3D scanning technology. Yara is also faculty at UCLA Department of Architecture and Urban Design, teaching design studios and technology seminars at the graduate level. She has previously taught at SCI-Arc in Los Angeles, as well as the Schule in Frankfurt, Bartlett in London, and ALBA in Beirut. All Interactive is the title of tonight's lecture that investigates the role of interaction and immersion in designing spaces. We will dive into the exciting world of game engine, photogrammetry, artificial intelligence, simulation, networking, as well as virtual and mixed realities to understand how they can be built as research tools. After the lecture, Yara will be joined by Lynn, professor at the IOA, as well as the UCLA Ideas campus. He's the founder of GeoForm and the co-founder of the robotics company Piaggio Fast Forward. For decades, Greg has been pioneering work at the intersection of the digital and physical in both architecture and design culture in general. So very excited about what is to come. I would like again to extend a warm welcome and hand over the screen to Yara Feghali.
Perfect, thank you so much. I'll share screen. Great. Thank you so much for the introduction, Maya, and thank you for having me today. It's a pleasure to share my work and discuss these topics with you and Greg and everyone here. First, as you mentioned, I co-founded Folly Feast Lab with Viviane El Kmati in 2019. Most of the work you will see today is from the past 3 years. We run Folly Feast Lab together and we create, as you said, visually led immersive and interactive experiences to address present social and urban theme. We'll see in a bit what that means. And we are based in Santa Monica in Los Angeles. So we work on social, urban, and digital culture theme with an acute focus on creatively working with artificial intelligence, photogrammetry, virtual reality, and networking technology. This talk is titled All Interactive, Developing Experiences as Design Research. So let's dive into the world of interactivity. Interactivity responds to the question, how much am I doing? Meaning, where are you on the spectrum of being a passive recipient to an active player? An interaction could be you liking a video on TikTok. It could be you playing Monument Valley or Sims. A passive recipient would be swiping through images, exploring a VR world, being able to see infographics, but not really doing much other than looking. Closer to the active side, active player side of the spectrum, you're playing, making decisions on what you're looking at, even customizing your space. Playing a game, designing new elements, which would be considered an active or very active player. A second word that is important here, and we need to define before we start, is immersion, which would be answering the question, how deep do I want to go? And this spectrum passes from the physical realm to the virtual one. Immersion could be being transported by a novel or binging your favorite series again. But in our case, we mean spatial immersion. So on the lower side of the spectrum, you are immersed through your smartphone, screen, tablet, laptop, or you're playing Pokemon Go in augmented reality. It could be that you're immersed in virtual space, but still being able to see your physical surrounding, like in mixed reality. And on the highest part of the spectrum, you're immersed in virtual reality, visiting, for example, the Golden Gate Bridge through Google Street View VR. So these two spectrum define this diagram that Viviane El Kmati, my partner in practice, has defined. It's a diagram where you can see on the lower left in coral, the not interactive nor immersive, meaning you're looking at visuals, but you're not doing anything. It's just running on its own. If you're in an interactive space, but not immersive, then you're in the purple zone, so lower right. you're looking at visuals and you're doing things. If you are in an immersive space and in an interactive space, then you're in the gradient quadrant. So you're inside an immersive space, you're doing things, and these three quadrants are the quadrants I will show work from.
Graphic computer.
So think this for immersive and interactive
in order to
space.
construct a digital map of the space, allowing Penny to fill the room with holograms. What you see here is next generation hand tracking. Penny moves the holograms throughout the room in real time and space. The boxes react using physics-based simulations, just like they would in the real physical world.
Sorry, Penny. This may be a bad time, but...
So you get you get it. I'm sure all of you have seen this video already. In part one today, we will look at low immersive and low interactive projects, which fall in the category of artificial intelligence simulation. Part two will dive into interactivity with 2D games. And lastly, we'll jump into fully immersive, fully interactive with the spatial web, metaverse, the spatial web, which is also called metaverse. So let's start by a short introduction into where we are today, or the theoretical precedent to this type of work. It goes without saying that out of the many references, phytosterile is essential to the type of work that we do. Interaction and immersion are inherent to the medium of games, and we design interaction with game engines. An important artist's work, which is phytosterile, and in her talk in 2016 in Barcelona called Why Games? Can an Art Professional Think? As a tribute to Haroon Farouki, is a spectacular talk. And she goes basically through the history of games, starting from the Turing test to Google CAPTCHA, Are You a Robot?, getting inspired from Farouki's last work on video game and VR. And she argues that interactivity and immersion are the currencies of the future, monetizing your attention through endless click, swipes, and scroll. But to unpack all of these themes, let's first answer the question, why interaction and why now, why today? This is a bit complicated, but I'll try to get you through it. This is a diagram of the spatial web, or Web 3.0. And to the left, you have an interface, which is how you interact with a thing, the logic, meaning its computation, and data, which is its information. So the internet started with the interface being the desktop. You would install a program and you would run it through a LAN connection. The Web 1.0, the interface becomes the browser. You click and type. Instead of programs, you have websites, and the data is stored in structured servers. In 2010, we have Web 2.0, which is suddenly on our mobile. You touch, you swipe, the computing is done by an app, and data is stored in the cloud. Lastly, in 2020, we entered Web 3.0, which is where we operate as Folly Feast Lab. So the interface is wearables like AR, VR, and you show and you tell. This is where narrative, for example, becomes key. The logic is artificial intelligence. The data is stored through distributed ledger technology, the blockchain. And this 3.0 stack is what is called the spatial web. It's also called metaverse or the 3.0 stack, but we prefer the terminology spatial web. So let me simplify. It is for you, if you're in a VR or AR, using a VR or AR device, computing through AI and storing through the blockchain. But what you're experiencing is actually data privacy through distributed ledger technology, smart responsive environment, and immersive experiences. So I did, it's maybe too technical, the one before, so I translated it into an architecture logic. Please take this structure loosely as they're meant to be explanatory. So the interface, logic, and data in modernism, for example, we're making building through plans, making laws and regulations. Think, for example, Le Corbusier. In 1980s, with deconstructivism, we see the rise of importance in sketches, drawings, and models, importance of sectional and volume in terms of logic. Think OMA, Gary, and data is social and cultural. Then with parametricism, think Zaha Hadid, the interface becomes smarter with Grasshopper and BIM. The logic is performance and productivity. The data is materiality and statistics. And today, in 2020 and forward, we're arguing that the interface is mixed reality and storytelling. The logic is done through AI, behavioral trees, and simulation, and the data is blockchain. So that train of thought leads me to this question: how can game produce design research? Or to be more precise, how can developing interactive and immersive games with player feedback loops produce design research? To answer this, let's dive into the work. So we start with low immersive and low interactive spectrum with artificial intelligence simulation, AI simulations. So we're in the bottom left quadrant, the coral one. Wild Choreography is a workshop I taught at UCLA this past summer at Ideas. It's based on agent simulation and surface modeling. The project site is the notorious Beverly Hill 6-way intersection at North Beverly Drive, North Cannon Drive, and Lomitas Avenue. It's our wild choreography stage. So we studied the speed and aerodynamism of various forms of urban transportation, from electric scooter, bikes, car, buses, to deliver robots, as you can see with those 5 boards. This class is like a warm-up class to the mobility students, as you probably already guessed, Greg's studio at Ideas. We were able to assess our design through performance and go back and forth between design and testing. So this workshop provocation is to shift our understanding of architecture from organization logic to one of movement. We want to design through metrics and have constant feedback loops of data. So we studied traffic movement to learn how to read pattern in terms of vector flow. And students produced their version of these transportation vehicles and tested their velocity, as you can see with the fluid dynamic graph. We then wrote scripts to decide of the movement around and through this intersection in Beverly Hills, resulting in an AI-driven simulation. The designing at this stage is designing the script. So resulting in various narrative and world build around these vehicle design, they're able to dodge, navigate through the transportation crowd. The goal is to have a smooth circulation of all modes of transportation. So this way of thinking is transferable. Instead of transportation, you could think about people moving through spaces in a building with multiple stories. These were all simulation played on a screen. The movement is designed through coding. And once you click and play, it runs on its own in real time. But only on a screen, which makes it very low on interactivity and immersion. Another project on another seminar that also was given at UCLA, using similar logic, but was much more complexity, since this is a tech seminar, so it spans over 3 months. The one we saw before was only 3 weeks. Adapting to the next normal is a real-time quantifiable feedback tool. This seminar was also developed as a technical seminar class for Lynn's studio when we taught together last year at UCLA Ideas. It centers on how we can occupy shared public spaces safely in our COVID-19 era. So we studied through simulation and quantifiable feedback, 5 different building types used to adapt them to our life during the pandemic in terms of clean air flow and visitor flow. So we worked on a mixed-use building. This, contrary to the vehicle, is a building with multiple functions. So the movement designed through coding and runs with AI is the movement and behavior of people. So we used the beta version of a new workflow on Unity using C# called GOAT, goal-oriented action planning, resulting in these sort of diagrams indicating the possibilities of flows of people and action through time. So for example, when a gym coach gets to work, what are the different actions they do? They go to the different machine, attend to clients, take break, coaching, and so on. This simulation will draw all the pathway coaches will take to do these various tasks throughout the day in whichever order they want. And if we change the position of machines, the whole circulatory pathway network changes too, of course. So same as the previous project, even though intense on computing, once set up, it runs on its own. We then extract feedback from all the data and are able to modify it and design through that data sheet. This is a preview of how it looked when we ran it. Now let's jump into the second part, which is low immersive, but interactive projects that score, interactive projects that score low on our immersive spectrum. If you hear a dog, that's Kiwi. Sorry, we are in the purple part, so we're not immersed, not fully immersed, but fully interactive. So we're doing things while we're looking at visuals. My living room is public, happened right at the turn of the pandemic. We started in March 2020. It's a twisted documentation on the spaces we inhabit. We were isolated in our domesticity, and we used that constraint as a starting point of the seminar, working our way from realism towards abstraction. So we generated 3D scans from our domestic environments as built survey and worked backwards to drawing and then to design propositions by inputting them into an application. It was inspired by photogrammetry, which is the result of taking multiple images from a space and reconfiguring it in 3D as a point cloud. We were inspired by Gerhard Richter, overpainted photograph series, and he's just a juxtaposition of oil paintbrush abstraction on hyper-real imagery. So we look at the traditional process of making architecture from model kit to 3D model, to cutting and making 2D, to draw plans, renderings, and building it. And then we reverse that process and we start from the building. Then we produce cinemagraphs and then renderings and then unfold these 3D into plans and sections, as you can see here. So resulting in those cinemagraphs of student spaces, of students' objects. Some of them merge their 3 living rooms into one producing a fictive space where they're digitally together. And the photogrammetry stays true to the lighting, the resolution, and the quality of the spaces being scanned. This group, for example, worked on Entourage, emptying architecture from all the mobile furniture and stuff that inhabits it. And then we used all of these parts and developed a game where you could design through that kit of parts your new fictive living room with your colleagues. So we used animation, and you can see at the bottom of each of these 4 screens, there's a button to generate new part, one to rotate and arrange, and even the point of view of the camera could be different and you can export the result. I was lucky to be invited to run this again, workshop for an international platform, Digital Future. And you can see how this looks very different from the previous version, because that was a summer where COVID cases were dropping down and everyone could go out of their places. And then you see scans of people in the same room entering the game. Some students added plans and even themselves. And this work, in my point of view, would score low on immersion since it's only playable through a screen, but high on interaction because you could click those buttons and design the space through the game application. Something more recent from the end of 2021, this is a design studio at UCLA where we looked at different residential types in LA. Fabrics included courtyard houses, townhouse, our 2-zone collective, Venice Canal, Venice walkways, and urban core apartment, and of course, the Los Angeles Dingbat. And it was a typology game where the outcome of this work is an operation manual application to serve as a collective intellectual repository, quantifying a taxonomy of LA types to draw from and deploy in future conjectures. You can see a little preview of that game. So on the left, you have all of these buttons, which are the different typology. You can attract, repel with the two upper buttons, and then you have all of the data and percentage of how much square footage you're using. And then you have an image output. You can export OBJ and you can switch the camera. You see where it's going. This is the first Folly Feast Lab project. It's very different in nature. It's a project about Beirut. Beirut is our home to both Viviane and I, and we're both Lebanese. And in August 4th, 2020, the city was shaken by an enormous blast. And this destroyed the country's economy. And it was the motivation behind this awareness project. It's a virtual exhibition in Studio 106 in LA, and it was part of an exhibition at A+D Museum, and it's part of Wedge Gallery and Digital Saloon podcast, where we talk about the work. So hashtag Talk About Beirut is an awareness project displayed as an online exhibition. It's a story told about Beirut, Lebanon, through the lens of several artists from Lebanon, US, Germany, Kazakhstan, and Switzerland. It's a project where I was invited to be the co-curator, and we invited different artists, architects to join the exhibition and raise awareness, but also there was a link to a donation page to try to help from afar what was happening, the traumatic events and devastating outcome of the recent happenings in Beirut. It featured a before and after page, where one documentation was from before the explosion and another one was from after. This is Bana Hafar. She's an artist based in Beirut, and she contributed with images and a poem about Beirut, castles in Beirut. Gilbert Haj is a photographer, and he contributed with a photo and an essay that was from Jalal Toufiq, also a Lebanese philosopher based in Beirut. We had a contribution from Andre Zahia, a Lebanese designer based in LA, also using photogrammetry and game engine. And it's a game where you run through different parts of Beirut before the event. We had Tara Sahi, trained as an architect, and she's based in Venice, Italy, a Lebanese architect. And she contributed the images she took right after the blast. And she developed, and for some reason they developed with all of these chemical marks on them. And finally, we generated these 3D scans from existing buildings that were ravaged by the explosion. And we contributed this 3D virtual environment where you could walk in and see what happened to those different parts of Beirut. So you had access to the website, and you would visit those by interacting with the 3D scans and reading their description. So they're not as immersive, but they're interactive. And now we jump in, finally, the third part, which is immersive, and fully interactive. So the spatial web. Most of our work at Folly Feast Lab fall in that category, except the one Talk About Beirut that we just discussed. So when we look back at this diagram, we're in immersive and interactive. So we're in the gradient upper right quadrant. So we're working in the second half, closer to virtual reality, networking, and mixed reality projects. The first one is Virtual Herbaria. It's a workshop at UCLA. So Virtual Herbaria questions the way we visualize and utilize large data sets, archives, and libraries. With today's technology, we have access to an infinite amount of online data and years of archives and knowledge at our fingertips. Algorithms that can sort, search through, and identify hierarchy in that data are becoming extremely valuable because they're able to tell apart correct information from construct. In the last few years, we have seen the backlash of manipulated content and the potency of fictitious representation. So we are calling representation, reality, and artifice into question. With the catastrophic repercussion of the crypto market on our environment, we will address climate change in the Anthropocene and put our preconceived understanding of nature and technology under scrutiny. Our site is the online herbarium of the Southern Californian Desert, the Mojave Desert near Joshua Tree National Park. And Virtual Herbaria aims at reviving the Californian Desert Herbarium archive into an immersive experience through spatializing that data. So we started from 10 herbarium sample and designed new fictitious version of them. We used Unity Game Engine to design Virtual Herbaria as an interactive spatial archive where real and fictitious content could flourish. So we augmented them, and you can see the exhibition wall on the right with one specimen under it in a zoom in. We then designed Virtual Herbaria where you could access the app in VR and screen and walk, explore, and plant new specimen to design your individual landscape. And whenever you would approach one of those specimens, you would get all its data or all its information. So these are some of the results. As with previous work, student created a whole world around their design cacti. Some world building took it even further than other. I was happy to run this workshop also again in a 10-day workshop for BPro at the Bartlett, same outline, but a very different outcome, ranging from even more extreme on the world building side. I guess in London, they're less familiar with Joshua Tree and the Californian desert, so we see underwater scenes and other fictitious worlds. Now we jump to Spatial Fabulation. Spatial Fabulation is an exhibition we did in Frankfurt when I was teaching at the SCI-Arc architecture class. And it's a VR exhibition which led to a publication I co-edited with Johan Bettam on VR that came out last year. You can see some pictures of people using the space on the right. These were thesis students and we worked only in VR. Here you can carve in VR using architectural artifacts designed by the three designers you see on the left, Chumi, Ungers, and Sterling. Other works involved interactivity, designing games and using photogrammetry to represent and tell stories of different cities. It led to a publication we worked on for more than a year and was pushed because of COVID. It finally got published and printed in late 2021, Breaking Glass, Spatial Fabulation and Other Tales of Representation in Virtual Reality. The book is divided in half. The first half are written contribution by VR artists, theoretician, and the second half is a portfolio of VR works, ranging from various VR applications by artists and architects and VR designers. Among the contributors, there's Rachel Rossen, Stanford Quinter, Daniel Binbaum, Marshmallow Laser Feast, Jacoby Stater White, Paisley Smith, Pop, and more. After this thesis studio in Frankfurt, I also taught another thesis studio in UCLA, centered on Los Angeles and understanding the different urban identities. So there was an urgency to address our city cultural messiness, messy in the best way. This research studio explores Los Angeles' lush diversity by uncovering its multiple layers of resolution. We speculate through interactive storytelling on the near future of cultural space. So architecture strives through multiple mediums. In this specific research studio, we were interested in architecture as a visual apparatus, and we were concerned with representation and that we would build interactive artifacts. So this is one of the students' work. Chinatown at Home, one of the theses, is a speculation on the technology behind photogrammetry. It explores friction between texture and volume. Chinatown is a recognizable architectural style that has been copied in every major city. She explores the idea of following through the use of mapping technologies and convolutional neural networks, wrapping our exterior and interior domesticity, resulting in designing a design platform, a game that will convert any space into your own #Chinatown at work. So you would buy these NFTs or these different artifacts that you could add to any space. We worked with machine aesthetics, photogrammetry, and cinematographic techniques. And that's her with the YouTube review of her own game. Other projects looked at the cultural diversity of UCLA on campus or on the Sunset Boulevard with a work looking at fashion and using Zoom interface to communicate the work. These were the last quarter of 2019, 2020. So it was the first few months of the pandemic when we had to jump into online learning and the first few days of using Zoom. Other were imagining what would the city look like if it were designed by an AI. This speculation resulted in interactive platform and games using a design research, used a design research on aesthetics and urban design. Leaky LA is another work. It's a bit older, but I'm gonna go quicker because I think I'm running a bit late. So it's using machine learning and image style transfer techniques for 3D space and then inserted into a VR application. They are speculative streetscape design, exploring the future of AI-generated aesthetics on the facade of downtown Los Angeles Art District, using style transfer on extravagant Rococo fabric. And they produce these mesmerizing, beautiful landscape where you explore machine vision and human vision into these cinemagraphs. Now jumping to the before last project, and it's the last two projects are Folly Feast Lab projects. So in 2019, we were asked to join LA Forum to be part of the 5 Architects Vision of LA in 2020. So the exhibition was planned before the pandemic, and we had to adapt the situation and turned our VR experiences proposal into a drive-in exhibition. So once inside the pandemic, the exhibition got titled Everything Changes, because everything did. For this project, I want to go through the different steps we took from research to production. We worked with Terry Wolverton. She's a writer, and our project reacts to her text. She wrote about her experience of coming to LA back when being a lesbian wasn't acceptable anywhere outside of LA or San Francisco. What you see on the right here is a piece of her writing. And here you can see all the different artists that were part of the exhibition. So our work in reaction to that text looked at 20 different residential neighborhoods in LA to tease out the particularities of their domestic front porch. This is a map of all the different places these houses were 3D scanned from. So from Venice to Culver City, Echo Park, Silver Lake, downtown, even Hollywood, Santa Monica, Koreatown, and other. We processed all the photogrammetry of all of these houses and arranged them so they become seamlessly integrated with one urban scape. We called it a streetscape. This is what they looked like before we processed anything. And the focus of this work was a story of a character we called Amal. Amal is a female name in Arabic. It also means hope. And it was a story of a woman who's on a journey driving through LA's neighborhoods in search of her own queer community. She just landed and she was going her first drive through the whole different residential landscape of LA. Stereotypical symbols of queer culture and their manifestation on the house's front porch. That was an early sketch, what you're looking at on the screen, of how we imagined the space would be. So each 3D scanned house would be populated by objects belonging to different subgenre of queer culture. This is what it looked like after production. So the cut you see at the 2/3 of the screen to the right is where we're switching wall. This is a wall projection work. So at 2/3 of the screen, it's a different wall. So it looks like perspective. This is how it looks flattened. The story is told through the point of view, which is aligned perfectly in the space with the car passenger side and front window. So this is a diagram of what the space looked like. All institutions were closed, so we were lucky that we got a private residential garage in Silver Lake, and people would drive in and out of it while experiencing the projected immersive walls on the driver's and front side of the window. So you're the yellow car, you would drive in, and you can see on the side window and the front, the projection on the right, on the left corner. These are images. The projected immersive experiences would allow visitors to maintain social distancing guidelines by remaining in their cars and watching from inside. The drive-in portrays a filmic diary of sorts, viewed through the visitor's own car window as they were themselves driving through the reconstructed queer neighborhood. And this influenced the way we developed our immersive wall projection, which would have been very different when we proposed it at first with the VR headsets. So we adapted to the medium and the format in which it would be exhibited. So that's the setup during the exhibition, but that's the point of view from inside the car. So the projection extends to the full side of the windshield and the side window, and visitors park and enjoy the full 8-minute video, and you can join in at any point because it loops seamlessly. And here's a teaser. And that house in the center now is a house you would see before you drive into the park, the garage. That was the house right behind the garage. The last project, Mediterranean Sea Diaries, is a project that started in 2019 and is still in development for the coming 2 years. I'm showing you what it looked like in 2020. In this project, our research is centered around the Mediterranean coastline and e-waste economy, what we call the afterlife of overproduction. It's an interactive AI-generated VR forum about sustainable technologies and their build to dump syndrome. We were honored to be part of Fiber Festival in Amsterdam, where we presented this version of Mediterranean Sea Diaries. So it's a project that imagines the future of post-human spaces like landfills and e-waste lands as a result of overproduction. These spaces are generated as a cautionary tale of the Mediterranean coast near future and are based on recent events around the politics of waste management leading Lebanon to dump its waste into the Mediterranean Sea. So we started by looking at our phones, VR headsets, laptops, and tablets, smartwatches, and wondering what happens to them. And they turned out to be designed for the dumps. They were made to be thrown away after a few years and almost not capable of being recycled. We looked at the life of people living in these e-waste dumps, and as with anywhere where humans inhabit, they design their shelters, define their work. And we look back at Lebanon and our trash crisis and how they would deal with this new coming crisis. This is a woman wandering through near a pile of trash that has been inhabiting the city since the cleaning company closed its door about 6 years ago. And we now look at these beautiful views from the Mediterranean coastline, but filled with trash bags. These are all actual images that haven't been manipulated or anything. And it comes down to us working on this provocation. What is the afterlife of overproduction? So through the eyes of surveillance drone, we watch Amal and her trained dogs roaming around garbage. We work through the same medium as I already described. This world is generated by AI and inhabited by simulated people and pets that wander through the terrain looking for rare material to scavenge. It is a network VR space where people can come to discuss and wander around. It's a metaverse and find rare materials, build shelter, dive underwater. The narrative of that VR networking world is a queer narrative as defined by Chira Chess in the Queer Case of Video Game in 2016. It's an interactive experience where the environment will react to your touch and movement, and it's a collective experience where you are not alone in VR. The topics of discussion are set by the UN Goals for Sustainable Future. There are lectures held in the space. You can gain expertise. You can learn how to use the tools you learned in the VR spaces. So it's a multiplayer VR educational game in an open world environment based on the Mediterranean Lebanese coastline projected e-waste future. So come and join us. With this, it's time to wrap up. The question we started with is, and we're still working on, is how can developing interactive and immersive games with players' feedback loop produce design research? It's the thesis we are working on at Folly Feast Lab, but also in my teaching. We work with Spatial Web using VR, AR devices, computing through AI, and storing through the blockchain. Moving forward, we're currently working on 2 other projects that I haven't shown: a VR game about virtual sand surfing in Los Angeles coast line called Kite Parade, and on a metaverse virtual project developed on our servers from scratch, where we're designing in real time in the virtual space. Hopefully I can show you more of these worlds as we publish them. Thank you so much, and please stay up to date with our website. Thank you.
Great, Yara. Thank you so much. Thank you also for the very focused perspective on your work. And I would like to invite Greg to join the conversation.
Sure. Well, great, Yara. Thanks so much. So I have one question. Maybe it has different facets. But it seemed implicit, and I just wondered if you wanted to be explicit, that the low immersive, low interactive work was, as you said, used for design research and more of a, let's say, a guided tool by a designer or for a designer to a certain degree. Whereas if you then jump all the way to the, highly immersive and highly interactive examples, these were more what you called creation of open worlds, which were like for games or experience. And this, I guess the rails on it of the, let's say the linearity, I guess I'm interested in, and also just for and then in the middle you had the exhibitions, by the way, which I guess were less immersive but also highly interactive. So I just wondered, is it true that the designers don't need high interactivity because they're guiding or something, whereas for exhibition and game you need higher interactivity? Is that kind of an explicit thing you're stating? And is that like just a rule or a law or a truth?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think that the explicit part of it is that when it's not interactive, you don't have much agency on what to change in it. So you're the designer, you design the game or you design the work, and then it runs on its own. You don't interact with it, as in you're not able to create, change, or produce anything in it. But when you get to the more interactive side, which is the later two, then you have more agency to what happens. So you make it a game, but you have agency to what happens when you do it. But then when you run that game and you put it out in the world, because it's interactive and because it ranks high on interactivity, it means that anyone can interact and change the game. So anyone becomes a designer. And I think that's the shift we have with the designing culture, at least virtual design, digital design culture in spaces like the spatial web, is that a user doesn't need to be a designer. Anyone could design through interactivity in that space. So I think what you're reading is an agency, that you have a lot of agency in the low interactive spectrum because you're in fully control of what you're designing, because nobody interacts with it later. But when you're on the other side of the spectrum, because it's interactive, because people can build stuff, can draw stuff, can change all the design, then the agency is shared. So then maybe you see that as, this is what you're reading as, the designer becomes less dominant as before. But I think that you're designing these interaction, right? It's not any interaction possible. You're coding these interaction into the space. So you're also designing, but you're collaboratively designing, I would say. Does that answer? You're muted. You're muted, Greg. I cannot hear you.
Sorry. So yeah. Yes, it does. But I do have, I keep asking you questions about it. So in the, let's say the high singular agency to change things, you're more programming, like in those dashboards and things, are you working more, would you say, numerically than atmospherically, or no?
No, I think the spectrum of like the presentation is like easy computing to extremely complex. It gets only more complex. But because they're built environments, I think you design the environment more as you move into spatial web, because you suddenly are in immersive spaces, so you inhabit those spaces virtually. So suddenly environment becomes really important, where in the first one, what you're extracting from these design is a spreadsheet.
Got it. So not so much even geometry, but quantity or some numerical values.
Yeah, I would say numerical values.
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. And so, but for the people that populate the atmosphere with plants and trees and foliage, or with even, apartments, like apartment mm-hmm. content, let's say, there's on the back end, there's a lot of programming. On the front end, is there the need for that or no?
No.
Okay.
So like anyone, this is why I think the agency is shared and it's collaborative, because anyone from a 5-year-old to anyone that is just entering these spaces is able to interact with them. And this is why when designing those spaces, there's a lot of work that goes into intuition. Like, what is intuitive as a design movement in that space? What would be intuitive to do without me guiding you, like with a 10-pound book on what you should read and how you should interact and all of that, but how the spaces design would be intuitive to the user.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, very, very interesting. And for the feedback on those environments and on the decisions made with them, are they, let's say, are they equally complete at some moment, or is there more of a role of let's say user testing or something than would be typical in a building project?
Yes,
in a physical project.
In a real physical project. I think, yes. So there's a project I didn't show called the Green Print, and we are building a simulation of a society that would be self-sustainable. And we are basically working only with player feedback. So the idea is that we put people into that VR world with basic necessity for a community of 12 people. And then they're able to answer questions like, how would you design the city? How long would you want a workday to be? How would you want to self-sustain that community? And that all of that is through users' feedback. So in that type of work, the user feedback is actually the main thing we want. So the space and environment is designed towards that feedback. Where the work I showed today, it's less about the feedback, more about a place where you can go educate learn, interact socially in VR, and you can play or experience new spatial quality. So I think it's like two different types of project, but we do have a project that is totally quantifiable in terms of user feedback and is, of course, it's like a pre-run to a building project. So it is meant to be built in the real world, which I think where that mentality of user feedback comes from.
Mm-hmm. In terms of the machine intelligence, artificial intelligence, would you say that there's any gradient from the, let's say, generating numerical values from a spreadsheet as a designer to building an open world for players? Or is that something that's consistent in the background of all kind of equivalently? Or is it more important in the design one than it is in the user one because you've got all these players, so you don't need it?
It's, you remember that diagram I showed with the last is Web 3.0? And there's three categories, right? One is wearable, AR, VR, telling stories. The other one is AI computing, and the last one is blockchain. So if you want, the first uses AI computing, but doesn't use the other two. And they're also technologies of computing. So like, as you move forward in the work, you start using these three categories. So you are still using the logic of simulation, that agent simulation in a Unity, these agents running around buildings or the cars running around the intersection. That logic is still used later as AI. It's just a different type of script. It's that because it suddenly becomes spatial and you have to count for low resolution, because as you get high on the spectrum, you need to be careful with efficiency because you cannot have the game run too heavy. It's very technical, but it's the same algorithm. They just get more, they just become different because they have to deal with efficiency and where you move, and if you're able to see everything and it doesn't lag and all of these things, it basically changes the way you write them. But there's the same logic.
Understood. Okay. And then the last thing I would ask is, in terms of let's say, a digital twin, you didn't mention that so much, but I am curious about, the role of a digital twin to help inform, let's say both how things get augmented.
I would
I'm
say
just thinking of WeWork, where they look at their customers not as clients but as players, and they have a digital twin, and they record the behavior of the people in the digital twin to then inform what they do in the physical environment.
Yeah, I think we have it. We have it only in that feedback project. For now, it's really about, we record not in physical space, but we record the movement of people in digital space, like which interaction did they did most, which one nobody used because it was too hard to understand. So we get feedback from their virtual experience, but not from, like what you're saying is they record people moving in the space, and then that informs their digital simulation. In our case, it's like how it happens in virtual space informs the way we rewrite and make more efficient the codes. Mm-hmm. So the digital twin doesn't really come from the physical realm, except in that one project, the green print, where we have a feedback loop and it's meant to be a build project. But in the other world, we learn from the virtual space and it feedbacks into itself, which I guess because it is spatial and it's not like a plan where we're running agent in, but it's a fully interactive space. But I don't know if you would call that a digital twin, because it would be a twin of itself, because they're both digital.
Right. Okay, well, I think we should open it up to everybody if you're game for that.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for the questions. I know it's very technical.
So let's see if anybody has questions. As always, you can type them into the chat or just turn on your cameras and interact with Yara. Maybe I have one which you touched upon that, but kind of like I'm interested in the constraints of the tool that you use and kind of the constraints that you set with the tool. And it made me think when you were talking to Greg about the work of Jose Sanchez and kind of like his game environments, which are kind of, I mean, I want to say open-ended, but I know that that's not the principle of an open-ended game, but they are constrained environments with limited resources, and kind of some of his investigations are about, again, to give, to share design agency, but to work within a very constrained environment where not everything is possible, and making decisions within this constrained environment. So I was wondering how you approach those limits. And on the other hand, that you were talking, about the technical aspects, I just wonder, how much does, and I'm going to put it very, very, very dumb in a way, how much does a polygon count, limit a certain feedback that you can get back?
A lot. Yeah, I think, we design these worlds with constraints because whatever you can do in that world has been designed. There's not something you're going to be able to do that is not designed as an interaction. But I think what we get as a feedback from that, it is open world environments, meaning you can roam around, walk everywhere, try different things. But what we get back from that as a feedback is like, which interactions are you using more? Which kind of spaces are you more attracted to? So we are able to get also a type of spreadsheet where we understand what interaction, what spaces, what environment, what's mood, what lighting, what all of these different elements are attracting more users. Like how many time people spend in that space, how many people went and read the full description and things like that. And that would feed back into, for us, it's important because we understand then what is working in terms of all of these different options. But I don't think it's collaborative design, but the constraints are everything because we are, designing the full thing. But then of course there's technical constraint, like the metaverse we're working on now only fits 30 people, because if it's more than that, then we have to go through another route that we don't want to, because we want to still host it on our servers. So again, it's like very technical, the background of all of this. But of course, you know, when you work in VR, it's very important how many polygons you see, the lighting, the fog, if you bake the light before, there's all of these technicalities. Like when I was showing belonging, you know, to make that road seamless and all of these houses seen next to each other on the same street when they're from different days, different lighting condition and all of that. That's also technical, but the whole point is that the technicality is seamless. So you experience this environment without thinking about how does it work or where's the code and all of that. But we also have, you know, we're very interested in the aesthetics. Like I think in our virtual environment, we focus a lot on the aesthetics of beauty, on the mood. We work a lot before in designing the avatars, on understanding online personalities, understanding how to build for VR spaces. And I think our training as architects, both of us, helps a lot in designing these worlds.
I mean, it's also super interesting to see, you know, that they're really environments, right? So they're multisensorial. I mean, you know, you show now kind of like let's say like a little trailer of the work. It's always says music, right? But in general, right? There's sound that one works with in terms of, I don't know, I guess guiding or for the atmosphere, right? So there is a lot of atmosphere which is connected to many senses, not only visually, right?
And you'll get to see it tomorrow.
Yes. And I just wonder, you know, looking back at that, it's kind of how important in terms of interaction, and you might not know, but just from experience, since you're, you know, our pro on this, how important is it that the experience of the environment is, let's say, fluid in terms of, you know, that it's not lagging, that it's not, I mean, I get very frustrated with technology, right? When it's kind of like, I don't know, when it's lagging. But in terms of engagement, right? That it's not distracting, that you kind of can still get the feedback, let's say, at least that you want to have.
Yeah, I think it's an important question, and it refers to what we're talking about before, like intuition. How can you design interaction that are intuitive for users to use? And you know, whatever technical lagging a computer, a tablet, a phone does, in VR, that's called being nauseous in the space. So the reaction is bodily from the user. So you really don't want to get to that point. So of course, there's a lot of studies, you know, a lot of like papers and studies that you find that help you define the frame rate and the movement and how slow or how quick things need to be. So there's, you know, a lot of research to back up all of that. And we use the results from these research. And then, of course, when we try and errors, like this is why Mediterranean Sea Diaries, we've been working on that for 3 years and we have 2 more years, because we're solving all of these issues. Like, how do you not get dizzy? How do you socially interact in VR? How the environment is, you know, present, but sometimes disappears and it focuses on different actions that you have to do. But yeah, you know, there's a whole discipline in which there's so much research in all of these new technologies, and every time they put an update, like when I was with Greg last year and we work with the new beta AI simulation algorithm in Unity called GeoAP, then also that was a beta version. We gave feedback to Unity about what was working, what wasn't working. And yeah, the exciting thing for me, except like other than everything that I've just said, is that it's contemporary and you get to work with the companies that are doing that and get feedback from them and try new things that are in beta version. And for me, I find this extremely exciting.
Cool. We have a question in the chat, so you can read it yourself. I'm just going to read it out for the audience. But How do you see, if possible, the peak of the development of agent design, meaning any utopian ideal case? What do you think about the limits of user interaction in the game, such as the limit reached by the tenant design philosophy in Soviet modernism architecture as an example?
Yeah, I think there's a camp that argues that interactivity in VR is not desirable because the more you can interact, the more the user can change the product that you're, like the work that you're producing. And you know, designers, we want to have more agency over what they design. But I don't see, like, about the second half of the question, what do you think about the limits of user interaction in the game? I think that's a decision you take. If you don't want user to interact, you don't do interactions, or you calibrate them that there's all the outcome, like, you know, the Black Mirror movies, like all the outcome are calculated. Whichever route you take, you already know what's going to happen. Like, there's not one linear narrative, there's a tree of them and you've designed all of them. So that's, we like to like produce the start of the tree and then see how the users develop the second half. We're not like fully in control. I think for us, it's very important that it's collaborative, that we actually use the user feedback and they're not just trying or interacting restrictively in the game. So I think it's the limit of user intersection is something you have to decide on. And it's a party you take. The first part, how do you see, if possible, the peak of development of agent design? I think agent design is something that I've worked with Greg a lot. So maybe Greg, you want to jump in and answer how you see agent design future in terms of architectural design, like working with designing agent simulation.
Sure. I mean, I think there are two questions in that one question. So, I mean, for me, an agent-based design is almost like a straight up replacement for a spatial program based on square meter dimensions and adjacencies. So I mean, I think that is the future. Like, I would just say it just replaces it. But that's not about a user-based. I mean, that's what's very interesting is the process of developing a typical program is usually interviewing a lot of clients, and going down the hierarchy into the clients to find out what the spatial needs are to write the program to do a good building. When you replace that with agents, that's a different kind of a thing, because then instead of, like, as you're listening to people, you're actually creating an agent rather than creating a floor plan. But if you say, now we're going to replace that with a player, that's a very different scenario. And so, and I think that it's important to probably distinguish between an agent-based approach and a player-based approach, because I think those are two very different things.
Yeah, true. Yeah, I think, you know, the user-based approach is maybe something that, it's not maybe, it is something that comes from the customizable economy, where you can customize anything you buy, anything you do. You have like a typical, let's say the Nike shoes, you have the typical shoes, but then you can customize the color, you can texture, pattern, you can customize all of that. So for me, the user is a way where you can experience a virtual space, but you can customize your experience of that. So it's true that it's very different from the simulation agent logic. But in that space, you would interact with simulation or pets that are already inhabiting that space. So I think that agents and the players are interacting in the space, even though they have totally different logic, because the agent follows an AI simulation logic and the players follows a human behavior logic. But yeah, I find all of these questions and topics extremely interesting. And these are the kind of discussions we have when we think about the world we build and work in.
Cool. Are there maybe any more questions that came up?
Yeah, thank you for the question.
Well, I would say if there are no more questions, I think this is a wrap. We continue here with our day. The audience can finish up theirs. And thank you everybody for joining. Thank you, Yara, very much. Thank you, Greg, for the conversation. It's been great. So the Sliver lecture series is complete. If anybody is in Vienna and has not seen the exhibition, which is closing on May 25th, and it's showing the IOA work from the perspective of research and design being an interconnected affair. Oh, there's one more question which came up. How? I just made like an exit. Okay. Yara, do you mind taking that up? In the chat?
No, sure. I think Greg answered that already. So the question is the agent-based simulation can not only impact the program and architecture design, but also impact the way spatial composition? I think that's what you were saying, Greg, is that instead of designing a plan, you design an agent that then moves into the space and through the flow of movement designs the space as a spatial composition and programs. So,
and I would say that it probably does, just by its nature conceptually, replace room-based thinking. Like if 500 years ago everything was a room and you actually walked from one room to another room, and then if, kind of magically all architects discovered the circulation or the corridor, mm-hmm. and suddenly you didn't walk through rooms to get to rooms, but you actually walked into corridors to go into rooms. I think that the agent-based approach is very difficult for people who think in rooms and corridors. It also is difficult for people that love circulation, because suddenly everything is like a free plan of circulation and in a field of openness. But so, yeah, I think it poses, I would say, it impacts by posing problems. Mm-hmm. I think it's to be determined what the architectural response to agent-based design thinking is, because it really does take away everybody's fundamental thing, which is, I'm going to make a bunch of bubbles, and the bubbles are rooms, and the rooms have a big label in them, and the big label is what happens inside this shape. And suddenly, if you do an agent-based approach, that's out the window. So,
yeah, thank you so much, Maya and Greg.
Thank you, Yara.
It was a pleasure to share work.
Thank you, Yara, for taking the time and sharing your work. So good.
We always want you around the Angewandte, Yara.
Yes, I'm honored to be in conversation with you too and the Angewandte. Thank you.